In this video, we will cover major macroscopic structures of the female reproductive tract. So as mentioned, there are going to be a lot of parallels. You might notice there are similar muscles found in the female and the male tracts, and then we're going to have parallel organs that have the same or similar functions between the two systems. So there are a couple views we can talk about the female reproductive tract from. If we want to talk about, for example, the uterus, the fallopian tubes, and the ovaries, that is going to be better seen from an anterior perspective. While I can ask questions from this view, we also want to be comfortable with this view. So what we've done is we took our model from mid-sagittal and we've just rotated it slightly so that now we're looking at an anterior view. What we can see are the ovaries. So that's the main thing I want to point out from this view. Ovaries are going to be equivalent to the testes in our male reproductive tract, producing the sex cells. We have fallopian tubes as well, which are attaching to and wrapping around the ovaries. Those are going to closely interact, and what the fallopian tubes will do is they are going to connect all the way back to our uterus, which is this guy here. So you will see other diagrams in the PowerPoint showing that more anterior view, but for the purpose of this video and preparing you for the lab exam, we're going to ask most of the questions from this perspective. But make sure you understand that relationship of the ovaries connecting to the fallopian tube, which is eventually going to lead back to our uterus. A lot of students cannot identify the uterus or the vagina on the lab exam. So I want to make sure we're hitting that in the video and make sure you are reviewing those structures so you're comfortable with them. Another thing people often confuse is they say that the bladder is the uterus because they're right next to each other. If you get mixed up, we need to remember that the bladder is part of that renal system. So it's always going to have an external opening into the urethra. And the bladder is also more anterior on the female reproductive tract. So it's always going to sit more anterior to the uterus. Other large structures we can see, you will be able to see external genitalia. We talked about the scrotum in the previous video. The analog in the female reproductive tract is going to be labia majora and labia minora. So we'll have essentially a pair of larger lips and then smaller lips. Labia majora is number 6 on this model, so it's going to be the more external fold. And then the internal fold here is going to be our labia minora. So one thing that we can't see very well on either perspective are ligaments. So I'll just talk briefly about this. It's not testable, but it will help to give you the big picture. The female reproductive tract, and especially the uterus, has ligaments that are going to help support it and suspend it so that it doesn't come squashing down on our bladder. So we have two main ligaments, the broad ligament and the round ligament, that are going to be helping to suspend the uterus and the ovaries. There's going to be another suspensory ligament, which is securing our ovaries, and what it's going to do is attach to the ovary and actually anchor it to the lumbar region of our vertebrae. And then we're going to have an ovarian ligament that is connecting the ovaries to the uterus. So it would cross more towards the medial part of the model here. Nothing that you can really see, but it is helpful to keep in mind we have a lot of ligaments that are helping to secure these things so they don't squash down on other systems in this region. So let's talk a little bit more about the vagina. This is going to be that opening into the external environment. And you can see here it has this jagged or ridged appearance. And what we have are these ridges of muscle called rugae. Yes, that term should sound familiar from when we talked about the stomach. There were rugae in the stomach to allow expansion. In this case, the rugae of the vagina are also going to allow expansion. And this is going to be the main passageway from the external environment for sperm to enter into the female reproductive tract. I want to switch over for a second and show you an anterior view. So once again, this is an anterior view. We have the uterus in the middle here. The vagina is going to be this ridged passageway opening up into the uterus. And in between the two, we have this narrow region called the cervix. So this is going to be the lowermost portion, or almost like a neck of the uterus. It's a very narrow passageway, and it almost acts like a sphincter. So the cervix is going to have a lubricating function. In the event of sperm transport, it's going to lubricate and help ease that transport into the uterus. During ovulation, there's going to be some changes to that lining. For example, the cervical mucus is going to get a little thicker in response to different hormones like estrogen. So overall, it's going to have a lubricating function depending on the level of hormones and what else is happening, such as sperm transport and fertilization. Other things we can see from this perspective, we have, again, the ovaries. These are paired structures. The fallopian tubes are going to be that connecting vessel from the ovaries to the uterus. And on the end of the tubes here, you can see these little finger-like appendages. These are called fimbriae. And they are actually going to brush up against the ovaries so that when a sex cell, an oocyte, is released, these fingers, the fimbriae, can actually catch that so that it is transported to the uterus. In terms of oocytes, that is going to be the female equivalent of a sex cell. So that is oocyte. Think of these as immature ova or immature eggs. So they're going to be produced in the ovaries and they will be swept up by those fimbriae. We'll talk about oocytes in a future video discussing their histology. One cool fact to know is that, and this is in comparison to the male reproductive tract, in the female tract, our lifetime supply of eggs is determined before birth. So there's going to actually be a process for the partial maturation of oocytes, and that process will stall again until puberty. But in terms of the number of eggs that are in each female reproductive system, that is going to be determined before birth. And that sums up all the macroscopic structures you need to know for the female reproductive tract. While this view is important, most questions on the lab exam will be asked from this mid-sagittal view. So make sure you're comfortable again with things like the uterus, the vagina, ovaries, and fallopian tubes. And also make sure you're not confusing those structures with things like our bladder and our urethra.